many of the local business community really rely on the Economic Outlook survey, and they look forward to this breakfast. Their support and active involvement in this morning's program reflects their dedication to our communities and their commitment to the advancement of North Central Massachusetts. I want to thank everyone from Fidelity Bank for helping make this morning possible. I'd like to ask for a round of applause for our community. I'd also like to recognize and acknowledge the support from the other chambers that are involved here today. I'm going to ask that they give a little wave when I call the chamber out. We have partnering with us today the Greater Gardner Chamber of Commerce. Kimberlina, thank you very much. The Sugar Valley Chamber of Commerce. And this year, the North Quabbin Chamber of Commerce. The Wachusett Area Chamber of Commerce. And I want to thank those chambers for their involvement today and their participation today. We're very lucky to have so many great chambers in this region and so many strong partnerships. I want to thank them.
Interests, so you can continue to thrive and prosper. So without further ado, I am pleased to introduce our speakers today. The program is going to follow. Chris McCarthy is going to give us the results of the survey, and then we'll have our two guest speakers make a brief presentation about their perspective on the economy. As you listen to the speakers, you can write down questions. There's the index cards on every table, and the team will pick them up at the end, and we'll have a panel discussion. We'll have a little Q&A. So I'd like to introduce Chris McCarthy. Chris is the President and Chief Operating Officer of Fidelity Bank. He has over 20 years of experience in banking and the financial services industry, and is a well-rounded executive with the experience in community and retail banking positions, community bank and retail banking positions, as well as both regional and national executive level experience in wealth management. In 2013, we had the pleasure of having Chris join the board of directors at Fidelity Bank, and 2.5 years ago, he joined the bank as President and Chief Operating Officer. He's a graduate of Nichols College in Dudley, where he earned both an MBA and a bachelor's degree in marketing. Please join me in welcoming Chris McCarthy.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning.
Morning.
I think we're having some technical difficulties here, but hopefully it'll work during the course of the presentation. It's great to see such a strong turnout once again for this breakfast. I think we always see a great crowd, and we appreciate that again today. As Ed mentioned, we have some really smart speakers today, and then you're also going to hear from Ed and I. But for me, this breakfast is always really a sure sign of spring when it comes around. Just like opening day for the Red Sox, the improving weather that we have in New England. It was snowing on Monday. It's 60 degrees today, and it's going to be snowing again, I guess, on Friday, or Easter, another sure sign of spring. And thinking of Easter, I don't know how many Catholics are out in the crowd this morning, and how many of you chose to give up something for Lent. For me this year, I chose to give up social media, and I've got to say it was really refreshing. The reduced stress, the reduced drama, the political rants that you see sometimes on social media. Is that better? So, for me, that time was, I used it in a different way. I took that 10 or 15 minutes. How to do that? There we go. I'll be my own technician. There we go. Is that better? That work? Now we're in action. I was saying, I use that time each day to do something more productive, do some reading, and just do better and more productive activities. And I still haven't plugged in now that Easter's over. Of course, I looked at the benefit of giving up social media. There was something else doing that for Lent. As an Irish Catholic, I could have either given up social media for Lent, or I could have given up drinking. So I figured that was a better to go this year. So it's my pleasure, as I said, to have the opportunity to share with you the breakfast and our survey results. But one thing we found each year is that these results really are a pretty good indicator of what's happening in this marketplace, and they really kind of foreshadow how the economy is going to be in this region. So I thought it might be helpful just to take a moment and look back and see how this past year unfolded based on what the results were last year. Last year, the sentiment that we saw from the survey was generally for a positive economy, and really we felt that the cycle was drawing to a close, but people were still planning to invest, consumers were still planning to save, and I think we saw the year pretty much play out like that in 2017. If you look, for example, the unemployment rate held steady last year at 3.5%. Consumer spending, although it slowed a little bit, still kept a strong pace. Despite the recent stock market volatility, the market's done pretty well over the past year. Inflation remained in check, even as the Fed's been raising interest rates, and we saw consumer confidence reach an 18-year high in February. So when we look at what we said in the survey last year to what really unfolded in the past year, it was pretty accurate. So with that said, let's get jumping right into the presentation. Just to talk a little bit about our survey itself. We conducted the survey over the last 4 weeks through both phone surveys and online surveys. In total, we had 423 consumers and 137 businesses respond to the survey, and all the respondents were from Central Massachusetts. And this year, I was telling Jeff before the breakfast, we have basically a base set of questions that we ask each year, but this year we incorporated a few new ones to take a look at how technology is maybe changing the way that we work and live, and also looking at the recent tax bill and see how that's impacting how people are thinking about what's happening. Got to move your slides, Ed. All right, so the headlines from this year's survey. Both consumers and business optimism for the economy has really not changed much over the last 12 months. Consumers are increasingly feeling threatened by the rising cost of living and healthcare, and really there's ongoing concerns about overall government effectiveness. The availability of skilled labor, this is something we've seen in most of the surveys over the past 7 years, continues to be a leading concern for businesses. And overall, businesses are viewing the tax cuts much more favorably than consumers. So let's jump into the first question. We asked both consumers and businesses, how do you think the North Central Mass economy will look over the next year? As you can see, businesses are much more positive than consumers about the local economy, continuing to improve this year. Consumer optimism about the economy is at 25%. And it's worth noting, in 2016, that number was 66%. So we've really seen quite a move over the last 2 years and how consumers have felt about things. The real shift that we've seen in this survey is the large percentage of respondents for businesses at 49% and consumers at 61%, basically feeling that the economy is going to be about the same this year. So not getting better, not getting worse, but continuing about the same. Next, we looked at what were the top worries or threats over the next year for both consumers and businesses. And the list have essentially remained the same. You can see for consumers, the overall cost of living at 25%, followed by healthcare, government effectiveness, real estate prices, and taxes. And for businesses, again, the list is for the most part stayed the same. Probably what's most notable here, you can see third on the list, the political climate. Last year that was at 21%. This year it's down to 10%. So businesses, I guess, perhaps with some of the things we've seen with tax reform and some business regulations, are feeling a little bit better about things. And you can see the rest of the list there. Again, topping the list is availability of skilled labor. Next, we asked businesses, how do you think your business will be over the next year compared to today? And overall, the business outlook is for the coming year continues really to level off from some higher levels over the last 5 years. You can see some trends. It was in the 70s a few years ago, and now it's around 50%. Next, we asked, what's the most challenging issue your business expects to face in the next 2 years? And again, as I noted previously, the availability of skilled labor continues to be increasingly a concern. That's up to 19% from 15% last year. Pressure from large competitors is at 12%, and rounding out the top four are healthcare and real estate prices, which we saw as a bit of a theme this year in both businesses and consumers. So on that theme, we thought we'd reach out to a local realtor. We asked Jasmine Loft, who's a realtor and the president of the North Central Mass Association of Realtors, for her perspective on what's happening. And she said the lack of housing supply will continue to drive up prices, gradual increases in interest rates, not to mention the impact of the federal tax cuts and the limits on property tax deductions has made a major impact on consumers' buying power. And you can see the example that she gave there, just kind of how buying power can affect with interest rates rising. So it's likely we'll eventually see, as interest rates rise, that might have some impact on real estate prices.
Increases in government spending, so not just tax cuts, but the spending. So altogether, those are adding some stimulus to the economy. So this is actually all good. Finally, turning to the rest of the world, you saw that the exchange value of the dollar had depreciated a bit. That just means our goods are cheaper to people who want to buy them in countries abroad. That's good for our export industry. But also growth in income in the rest of the world is doing better than it had for the preceding couple of years. And so, of course, when their income grows, they will buy more of our stuff, other things equal. So that's all good. Those are all supports that look good for the economy. A downside risk, which you may have heard about a little bit, is the possibility of trade wars, and that is a downside risk on net for the economy. There, of course, will be winners and losers. The winners are steel and aluminum makers in the U.S. and a few other industries that may be protected. The losers are consumers, largely, as well as businesses that use some of those goods for inputs. But in any event, so I put this down because there's so much news. There's the old news, the new news, the newer news, the very newest news, and then actually the new news, which happened yesterday afternoon and overnight, where there were the administration put out the list of the goods it was going to impose tariffs on from China, and then within hours, essentially, China responded with a bunch of other retaliatory tariffs on goods that it imports from the U.S. So that is going on. Just to remind you that China is, of course, an important trading partner. We import more from them than we export to them. However, there are other important partners. So the European Union actually is larger altogether, and then the sum of Canada and Mexico are larger than China. And so we have other important trade partners, but China certainly is an important one. And should we get into a more significant trade war with them, there are at least two effects. One is that the uncertainty about the back and forth and how many shoes will drop during the trade war is not good for business, and you can see the markets have responded unfavorably to news of additional trade barriers being raised. And then, of course, overall, if we really start to make it difficult for trade to flow more freely among trading partners, that's probably a net negative for the economy. It will benefit some people. There are legitimate issues to worry about. The abrogation of intellectual property by the Chinese economy, that's a thing we should worry about. It may not be the tariffs are the best way to address that. But in any event, this is a downside risk with some uncertainty. This is the chart to show you what our imports from China look like. The biggest ones have to do with things like computers and other electronic goods. Those are things that we largely import, and they may embody intellectual property that we should be concerned about. All right, so that's a risk. Inflation actually seems to be heading up after a period of watching inflation be a little bit low, lower than we wanted. You may know that our inflation goal for the long run is 2%. That's a number we think is best for the economy. We thought earlier in the last year that probably inflation was low because of temporary factors. It seems like that read may have been correct. If you look at the chart, you can see this is just showing inflation measured over the last 12 months, measured over the last 6 months, measured over the last 3 months. The more recent measures, which are in the dashed dotted special lines, those are all heading up above 2% as of today, and that's probably going to happen. So I think we expect to see inflation going up 2% and possibly a bit above. This is not an inflation panic. I mean, there's nothing terrible about an economy that has 2.1% inflation versus 2. That's fine. As a central bank, we do want to be able to deliver the inflation goal that we announced, which is 2%. If we couldn't do that forever, we should probably get fired. So that's where inflation is going.